The year is 1934. Turmoil brews in Europe and Asia. Depression ravages America. The world stands on the brink of the most devastating war mankind has ever known. Upon this forbidding backdrop, a small ragtag band of unlikely heroes traverse the globe as they search for fortune, fame, glory, or at times even a way to save the world. The Empire Club.
Okay, JB, so this was your debut GMing session, episode 2, Terror from the Tomb, and it was the reboot of your game, but Tom had done the first session, To Steal a Corpse. And so before I start reading the summary, I'd like to get your preliminary thoughts on both this, your debut session, and maybe even the title of the session. Go ahead.
Well, I think, like I had said in the last show, I wanted to play toward the chaos of what was going on to start the story up, which there's a couple of elements in there that really were really why I did what I did. I think that also it could be said that neither of us, there was a general idea about where the game was going to go, but we didn't know how it was going to play out exactly. You never do with a role-playing game. And especially in this case, because we were round robin GMing and there was a cliffhanger at the end of each one, so we didn't know where the other one was going to take it ever. Sometimes we discussed a little bit. For the most part, we had to give it up at the end of a game and hand it over to the other GM and just, see where he took it. So that was, I think we were both a little concerned about that. And we were concerned about how people were going to, enjoy it, whether it was going to keep going. And it did. We came back for a third game and ultimately a lot more games after that. So, I was definitely excited about it, though, about running this.
Yeah, for sure. And, we had decided from the outset that it was going to be a globe-trotting pulp story. So to the extent that that's a charted course for the game, that was a pretty good one, and we were off to an awesome start, starting it in New York City, because we were all living in New York City at the time, and so it made us feel very close to the story. So you guys were kind of charting it as you went, and I think you did a great job. Tell me about the title, Terror from the Tomb. Where did that come from? What was that inspired by?
I was just trying to find something that sounded like one of those old serials. The Buck Rogers or Gangbusters or any one of those like weekly 20-minute or 12-minute, I think even in some cases, like mini adventures they had in movie theaters, the serials. They all had that kind of title. I think George Lucas, when he was doing Star Wars, every one of the titles of his movies were supposed to sound like that. A New Hope, or Return of the Sith, or thing. So I thought Terror from the Tomb, because that's where we were going to take it eventually, or where I was going to take it anyway. But we already had the villain that we had introduced, so I figured there was going to be a tomb in there somewhere. In any case, so I just wanted to get that feeling of
that was fantastic. And it's funny that you mentioned the Star Wars titles, because I think we were playing this game, or at least this first session, probably a year before the prequel trilogy was made public, that it was going to be coming out. And so a lot of people were really turned off by the title, A Phantom Menace. But I wasn't. I loved it because we were already steeped in these pulpy titles, and I think by that time I was probably already now the other round robin GM. So I was like very keyed into the pulp tropes, and the title sounded just great, really pulpy to me. So I really liked it. That made me, I think different from most fans who were a little bit turned off by it. All right, so here we go. Episode 2, Terror from the Tomb. The group continued its search for the mummified killer as live scorpions were released into the main ballroom. As the group dealt with the swarm of crawling death, an ambulance arrived to take the dead to the morgue, and the museum was evacuated. During the confusion, however, the group discovered that the undead fiend had made off with the ambulance. Commandeering a taxi, Benedict and Juliet set off in pursuit, while Lord Merryweather chose a mode of transport more befitting his gentlemanly ways, a horse. A running battle ensued through Central Park between the heroes and a group of lackeys under Orthos Ra's spell. During the course of the combat, it was discovered that the mummy was not Orthos Ra, but a servitor, and that it was in the thrall of King Fuad's son, Prince Farouk. Now, stopping there, I'd like to just point out a couple of things. So, there's you introduced into the story here a little bit of identity swapping. So there really is an Orthos Ra, and he really is on the run in this game, and we find that out in the next part of the story. But it turns out that the character that the PCs were chasing was a decoy, right? So tell us a little bit about that all of that we just heard.
Well, there's a couple of what you called like character swapping or identity swap, and one of them is that I wanted to throw in an element of like I said, chaos or just surprise, that maybe they didn't realize what was going on completely. So I did that. And I also didn't want to bring us right to the big bad right away, because I figured that might be, too much, and keep the story going. But also the idea of the King Fawad, and I'm sorry, the other character is
Prince Farouk.
Prince Farouk. I wanted to kind of make it that there was, like you said, an identity swap. In that case, it was just just a left turn in expectations and what the characters expected was going on. And like I said, I just wanted to put my own spin on it to kind of take things in a slightly different direction, and have them figure out what was going on. So it was like added a little mystery to what was going on and where they were chasing this thing to. So yeah, I just threw some things in there to kind of shake it up a little bit.
Right. And so, you mentioned not wanting to pit us against the big bad right away. So, we got to keep in mind that this is a role-playing game, and we are using the hero system to play it. And so, there is an element of the storytelling that we have to design with the metagaming with the game mechanics in mind, sort of a meta story consideration of the gaming aspect of the game. And so, I think that your first attempt to do that was even before we even leave the museum, you unleash these scorpions on us. And I remember having to fight the scorpions, and we either defeated or decided to leave the swarm of crawling death, as I referred to it in the summary. Either way, the cue was when the ambulance arrived to take the dead to the morgue. That might have just shown up after the fight was over, and I suspect that's probably how you ran it. And that led us to the chase that you wanted to do. And so then, probably like the crux of the early half of the adventure was, first the combat with the scorpions, then the chase through Central Park. I remember that was a lot of fun, especially grabbing the horse, because again, I could sort of live out my Indiana Jones fantasy where he's on the horse chasing the truck with the Ark, and I'm on the horse chasing the ambulance with Orthos Ra and the second Egyptologist in it, the one who had not yet lost his life. He was still hanging on by a thread. And so that was a goal for us, was to sort of say that the first Egyptologist had been murdered in the first episode. Here was a second one that we could still save. And so we do eventually catch up to the ambulance, and then we find out that actually it wasn't the original mummy. It wasn't Orthos Ra. It was a servitor in disguise under the thrall of Prince Farouk. Or perhaps it was Prince Farouk himself, and the prince was under the thrall of Orthos Ra. I don't exactly remember, and it's not entirely clear from my summary. But either way, again, this brings us back to Phantom Menace. Again, that the whole identity swap thing was a really common pulp trope. And Lucas puts it in the Phantom Menace with Padme Amidala and the Handmaiden. And again, you're coming up with this story like at least a year before we had even heard that there was going to be a prequel trilogy, or at least...
we should be suing him.
Yeah, we should. Yeah. So, and so again, that just goes to show how you and Tom were very keyed in to pulp tropes. And this is one of the things I was watching very carefully because, as we discussed in the last episode, I wasn't 100% sure about the pulp genre. I mean, you guys said, yeah, the pulp genre, it's Indiana Jones. And I was like, okay. But that was really it. I knew Indiana Jones. I had never read any Doc Savage or seen any of the film adaptations of it. I hadn't read Alan Quatermain or seen any of the cinematic adaptations of that. So I was learning the tropes through this game, and I would later go on to read and watch other pulp stories, and then I would see the tropes being reflected in those stories then. So, and another thing is, I love how Tom came up with the name Orthos Ra. Now, Ra obviously was an Egyptian sun god, so that's entirely appropriate. But also there was the Ptolemaic period of Egypt where the Grecians basically took over Egyptian culture, and it became really a satellite of the Grecian Empire. And so Orthos, that's a Greek name. I mean, there was a city in Thessaly, which was an ancient Greek region, that was named Orthos. And then also in Greek mythology, there was a two-headed dog who was like the cattle herding dog of the giant Geryon. Geryon was like the grandson of Medusa, if I remember my Bullfinch's mythology. And the dog, the two-headed dog, Orthos, sometimes referred to as Orthros or Orthros. There's a second R in there sometimes, but Orthos, I believe, was the father of the Sphinx. So that's like a connection between Grecian, Ptolemaic Egypt and ancient Egypt. And I mean, this really just goes to show how you and Tom really did your research. Like, you guys really did your research. You were, I don't know if you and Tom were already historically well-versed in Egyptian, pre and post Ptolemaic Egypt and that sort of stuff, or if you guys, did research as you went, as you prepared the stories. When I read the next paragraph, we'll see an example of how you did this, and I'm going to ask you about that when we get there. But yeah, so those were really interesting, and that's yeah. What are your thoughts on all of that stuff so far?
I think at that time it was mostly that we knew pulp genre, and if we needed something, we were looking into it to try to pick stuff out. Although maybe a little bit of both of us knew. I think more Tom than I knew more about Egyptian style stuff, mm-hmm. But I knew about as much as would come into a role-playing game. And about when you're role playing, there's all sorts of weird little things that you pick up because you're trying to get an idea for a character, and you read all sorts of things that normally other people wouldn't read or know about. And so there was a little bit of that on my end. I know there was that on Tom's end, that he knew a little bit more about it than I did. But I think a lot of it too is that when you are drawn into running a game like that, you start go to the library. I don't think at the time we had much in the way of an internet.
We had a little bit.
Yeah. The same way we do now. Yeah. So we probably went a lot to the library and actually, picked stuff up like this. So, yeah. So it was a little of both, but like I said, I think Tom, for the most part, knew a little bit more about that type of stuff than I did.
Yeah, and you guys really hooked me from the get-go, starting it with the Egyptian theme. I mean, it was Tom's idea, session one, and you continued it with this game. Because I was and still am a huge fan of ancient Egypt and Egyptology. I mean, I was like the kind of teenager and 20-year-old where if I was, if I had gotten dressed to go out on a Friday night and I was walking out the door and there happened to be something playing on television about the ancient pyramids or ancient Egypt, that was it. I would sit down and to tell my plans for the night. I'd be watching that. That's how much of a geek I was for that kind of stuff. So I loved that stuff. And so that was a really awesome hook. And that might be why, well, I was going to say that might be why I was so fond of this game, because it made a great first impression on me. But we were all super fond of this game, so that's not the only reason. I mean, it was, as I said in the last session, it was a perfect storm of elements that made this so great. And yeah, we didn't have the internet like we have it today. Back then we had, you had your browsers, net something. I don't even remember. I'll put it in post production, but net something, the browser, and I remember that I would run a search. Netscape, very good. I would run a search and it would take so long to load that I would get up from my computer and go into the closet and plug in the vacuum, and I would vacuum my apartment, and I'd come, is it loaded yet? Not yet. And I'd vacuum, I'd start cleaning my apartment. My apartment was never cleaner when the internet was slow.
Sure, it was like this.
Right.
It is nose. Yeah.
So we would go to the library.
Dial-ups? Was it still dial-ups back then?
Oh yeah, the modem. Bing, bing, bong, bong.
One of my live-in girlfriends used to hate that because I'd get home after. At the time, I was a part-time waiter, and I'd get home at like 2 a.m. and get right on. But there's no way to silence that back then. You couldn't turn the volume down on that noise. So I put like pillows over the router to try to get it to not make that noise. And then invariably she'd come out half asleep, like I could still hear it, and then kind of just walk around and go back into the bedroom. Oh god. So anyway, we're getting off topic.
That's
so
funny.
what were we saying?
Well, we would have to go to the library to do all of this.
We had to go to the library to really get a lot of stuff done. So the Bayonne Library at that point, I think, where we were. No, we were in Queens, so we would have gone to the Queens Library, wherever that was. I don't think it was real close, or we could go to the one of the libraries in Manhattan.
Yeah,
New York.
You guys were in Queens. I was in Washington Heights in northern Manhattan. So if I wanted to go to the library, I would go to the main branch with the lions outside, and and that was really cool because you're among all of these books, and you feel like really scholarly and erudite, and you're doing you're preparing for a game like a pulp game, and it's just a really cool atmosphere to prepare for a pulp game. So, all right,
yeah, I remember.
Yeah. So let's get back to the story. So the chase terminated underground, where New York's A train was being expanded. The heroes were horrified to learn that Orthos Ra planned on being buried anew. His lackeys and the Egyptologists with him to act as his ghostly guards in the afterlife. Now, I love this little bit of New York history that you inserted into here. The A train, as we all know, originally opened in the subway opened originally it opened in the 1800s. But
what you mean by the subway? Yeah,
the modern subway was like 1932. Part of it opened, and then what became the A train was a year later in 33. And so now we're playing this game in 34. So you're like, okay, it's open, but it's being expanded. And I thought that was really great. And I didn't know that the early 30s were a landmark time for the New York subway until
the idea of the tunnelers who worked in there, and then maybe even the sandhogs that they called them as they went under the rivers that had to risk their lives to really get. The stuff that wasn't put elevated and was put underground was not the safest job to have, especially if you're going under a river. So I thought it was kind of an exciting thing to do. And to them, it would have seemed like miraculous, I think, to somebody back at that time, that they were putting in these trains everywhere, but you weren't going to see them because they were underground. And of course, just the A train, just the idea that it was the A train that kind of connects a lot of New York City together. And I love that idea. And of course, Count Basie's, take the A train. But yeah, I just love the idea of putting that in. And where would you get a modern equivalent of building a pyramid? You know, and the idea that this was this big modern version of doing a public work of and that he was going to take it as his own and make his own kind of burial ground. I don't know how I decided that was that he was now trying to get back into the afterlife for some reason, but I just thought it was a neat image of him building this kind of temple, I guess, underground under New York City, unbeknownst to anyone.
Right. Well, I mean, it made perfect sense to me at the time. Well, first of all, I also want to point out that the letter capital A is shaped like a pyramid, and he's underground, you know, in these catacombs, and there are all these catacombs and pyramids, and it made perfect sense to me because, you know, here he is, an Egyptian king, a pharaoh, you know, and his body is supposed to be at rest in his pyramid in Egypt. And instead, it's been, you know, maybe from his perspective, plundered and trotted around the world, and he's being put on display, and it's very undignified for him. And so this pharaoh is trying to get back to a resting place that is as similar to his original resting place as he could find in this new section of the world that he's in. And so he goes to the underground catacombs of the A train that are being built, because it's very reminiscent of the catacombs within the pyramids in which he was originally buried. So that made perfect sense to me, and I love that, you know, you were actually incorporating or drawing on real Egyptian death rites. I mean, you know, maybe those are the most obvious ones, like maybe those are the ones that everybody knows about. But I still thought that was really erudite, you know, that you guys were drawing on actual history and incorporating it into this fantasy story. Yeah, just fantastic.
There's another thing I was drawing on a little bit too. I wish I could remember the name of the author. He's the other big author besides Stephen King.
A horror author?
A horror author who did a short story of, you're going to have to insert it in afterward. There's a short story called The Midnight Meat Train, which is about, spoiler to anyone who's never read the short story, eventually find out that there is this ancient temple that is under New York City that is being fed by by lackeys of this ancient god or gods. And I just thought that the idea of there being something under New York City that no one was going to know about, that was this temple, and to an ancient Egyptian god or king, pharaoh, which that just kind of got to me. I thought that was kind of neat, and connecting it to the trains too was kind of neat. So yeah,
that was very cool. All right, so this is the point in the session in the night where we're drawing close to the end, and you're thinking like, okay, so now I've got to set things up so that Tom has an out for Benedict Grey, and I don't even remember where Max was this whole time. I think Max was just with us, you know, because so far it's just a lot of chasing and fighting, so it's easy enough for you as GM to just roll dice on Max's behalf whenever his turn comes up in combat, and otherwise have him take the back seat. So what were you, do you recall what you were thinking about how you were going to do the GM switcheroo?
I don't, but I suspect we may have. I mean, not before the game, but kind of agreed to something. I suspect that sounds like Tom actually saying, let's do it this way, you know, and maybe, but yeah, I mean, I wasn't trying to, but I guess the kind of cool thing about this was we weren't trying to kill each other's characters off. I just thought, well, I could do the cliffhanger and at the same time explain why his character isn't there next week. Right. So I did that.
Right.
I think I may have said, is that okay? You know, and he probably said, yeah. I think we were all friends enough that we knew we weren't trying to do the other characters in, you know, that we weren't trying for any type of killing off of a PC. So, and I just left it with him to get his own character out of it. I mean, it's in a way that would take him out of the action the next week too. So, and also, I'm not sure how much we had discussed before that getting rid of the characters. But I just had suspected that I knew running the game that I was like, what am I doing with him? Because he's my character and now he's an NPC essentially that I'm using. So I'm not sure that we had actually discussed it much, but it just kind of came together that way. And like I said, at the end, I thought, well, what better way? I think I'd had the idea that if they made it to the temple, there was going to be some type of,
cataclysm,
some type of cataclysmic event where, the whole thing gets, how many times in a movie have you seen the villain's lair self-destruct, in different genres? So I thought this was a good way to end it that way. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. All right, and so that brings us to our cliffhanger. The heroes saved the Egyptologist, but were too late to stop Prince Farouk from dynamiting the tunnel. As Orthos Ra sank back into the replica of his tomb, the heroes escaped the deadly explosion, except for Benedict Grey.